So today I want to talk about a scripture that I actually love because it's something that has really helped me in my life, and it's 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 7. And it says this: casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Now I remember when I started to really investigate this verse because I was curious what it meant by casting all our care. How do you cast your care upon God? I thought, okay, well, so if I go to the mailbox today and I find a bill in there that I wasn't expecting, do I just throw it up to heaven and go, here, God, catch, here comes my care, because I'm trying to cast it on you? I mean, it was like, how do you do that? And there's a lot of things in the Bible where it sounds good, but it's like, well, how do you really do that? And so I started to look up these words, and the word cast actually does mean to throw. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm right. Maybe you get that bill and you throw it in the air, praise him, And then care actually means anxiety and worry. So it's not necessarily the circumstance, that we're casting upon God. It's the anxiety and the worry that we get when those circumstances come into our life. And that anxiety that we get from the circumstances and the burdens that we carry in this life, they're actually the result of unbelief and distrust, which, come on, most of us here are probably not gonna say to God's face. I mean, if we could say it to his face, but most of us aren't going to say to his face, hey, I don't trust you and I don't believe what you have to say. I mean, most of us would be afraid of a lightning bolt if we ever got bold enough to say that to God. But actually, when we have worry and anxiety over things in our life, that's essentially what we're saying. Paul wrote it this way in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. He says, be anxious for nothing. Which cracks me up because, again, here's another scripture where it's like, in theory, this sounds great, but how do you actually apply that to your life? Be anxious for nothing? It's like, Paul, really, bro? What planet did you live on? If I go to my mailbox and there's a bill in there that I don't have money to pay for, I'm gonna be a little anxious. I'm gonna get a little worried. If I get a phone call today from the doctor and they say, hey, your test came back, we found something, we're gonna have to run more tests, that's gonna get my heart rate up a little bit and I'm gonna get a little anxious. If a family member comes and gives me news that I wasn't expecting to hear, that's gonna make me worried. So how can we really live this life not worried and not anxious? I think Peter says, hey, we're gonna experience those feelings, but we've got to learn to cast those upon God. Now, in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus talks about worry, and he says that we shouldn't worry either. So Paul obviously was, don't get mad at Paul. Paul's just kind of trying to reiterate what Jesus was saying when he was preaching the gospel, right? And so Jesus basically says, don't be worried about what you're going to eat, what you can drink, what you're going to wear. I mean, he just listed a few things, but in general, the principle is don't be worried about your life. And he says, the pagans, the Gentiles, those who are unbelievers, they worry about these things. But you are a believer, you shouldn't worry about these things. Now, why is Jesus saying this? Well, doesn't everybody deal with worry? Absolutely. But when he says pagans and Gentiles who don't believe in God, they worry about these things, you want to know why? Because they have only themselves to care for. And what I mean by that is, they have to care for themselves. They have nobody else to help them. They have nobody. So it's like, I've got to do this. I've got to figure this out. And when you don't have the resources, when you don't have the ability within yourself to solve the issue or, take care of what you're facing, then you start to worry and you get anxious. But God says, you have entrusted your life to the care of the Father. You should not be worried about your needs being met because your Father knows what you need before you even know you need it. Before you even go to the mailbox, he knows the bill is in there. Before you even pick up the phone, he knows what the doctor's gonna say. God is already aware of what's going on in our life. And it's not his awareness that should bring confidence to our heart. That's not what Jesus is saying, and it's not even what Peter is saying, because if you finish the verse, and going back to 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, he says, cast your care upon him, for he cares for you. So it's not that God knows what's happening in my life. That should give me peace of mind and heart. It's that God cares about what happens in my life, and he's concerned himself and involved himself in my affairs. I love how Matthew Poole in his commentary explains this portion of scripture, and he says it like this. He says, when it says that God cares for us, that means that he concerns himself in the affairs of his servants and takes diligent care that no good thing will be left wanting to them. That means that God is not just aware of our situation. He's not sitting in heaven with a bowl of popcorn on his lap, watching the drama of our life unfold, biting his nails, worried and anxious, saying, oh man, I wonder how they're going to pay that bill. And ooh, the doctor hasn't even called yet. When that happens, child, oh, I can't watch. Jesus, tell me what happens. God's not up there worried and anxious about your life. He's decided to involve himself. In the verse above, I think this is the key. I think this is the key to casting our care upon God. I think it's the key is in the verse above this, in verse 6, where Peter says, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. And what Peter's getting at is that humbling yourself is submitting yourself. It's really hard to cast your care upon a God who you've not submitted your life to his care. When you say, man, I've submitted my whole life, everything about my life, into the careful, caring hands of God. I know he's going to involve himself in my situation. I know he's going to help me. I know he's going to be there. I know he's not just going to, be a cheerleader and rah, rah, rah and say, hey, you can do it. Come on, I know you can. God's like, I know you can. And that's why I'm here. In Psalms 55, verse 22, I think this is where, by the way, Peter jacked this from, I think it's David who wrote this, but jacked it from the author of Psalms 55:22, because he writes, cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you. He says he will not allow the righteous to be shaken. Another place, David writes, I was young and now I'm old, but I've never seen the righteous forsaken or his descendants begging for bread. What David's saying there is, he says, since I was a boy to now being an old man, I've never seen God not come through for his people. I've seen his people need a lot of times for him to come through, but I've never seen him not come through. And here's the challenge that we all probably face. I know I face it, and maybe you do too. If I'm honest, I really want to live a life where I don't need God. I mean, if I'm honest, I want a life where I want God, absolutely. I want a life where God's there and he's involved and he's present. But I don't necessarily want a life where I need him, because that means I'm going to go through stuff that I can't control, that I can't fix, that I don't have the power and the ability to overcome or make it through. It's like I want to be able to do everything on my own. And the reality is, God knew that's not life. You'll never be able to go through life without needing me. And so God says, I have chosen to concern myself with you. I have chosen and determined to be diligent in my care and concern for you. So today, I hope that you truly will be able to cast your care upon God. I pray that when worry and anxiety does come and hit your heart and attack you, like it does everybody, that you'll be able to point the finger at that worry and anxiety and say, no, I'm going to trust God. I'm going to believe his promises, and I'm going to trust God, not because I know he knows that this is going on, but because I know he cares about what's going on in my life and that he's involved. And guess what? I need him. And you know what? He's never forsaken any of his servants. He's not going to start with me. He's not going to start with you. So I hope this is encouraging to you. Hey, if you know somebody who really needs this, pass this video along to them. and let them know God is for them and God is with them and God is here to help them.